Today is the Feast of Pentecost. Liturgical celebrations commemorate God's great love for us and recall many of his saving actions. They are more than the celebration of a historical memory. A liturgy is also meant to transform those participating in it. Pentecost, the feast of the coming of the Holy Spirit, celebrates the empowerment of the disciples to spread the good news of Christ without fear or error. And our celebration can do the same for us. It is sometimes considered the birth of the church. The other is when blood and water flowed from the side of Christ. The gift of the Holy Spirit completed Christ's promise to send us a helper who would remind us of his teachings and how to apply them to future generations. Last week, I used the analogy of the smartphone, which can enable us to access information via an invisible network. The Holy Spirit forms a spiritual network that enables anyone, anywhere, to access God. We access this spiritual network through prayer and contemplation. The Holy Spirit gives us the ability to continue Jesus' mission even though he is not present with us physically. There is a parallel between the Jewish Passover, which celebrates their deliverance from slavery, and their Pentecost, which celebrates the giving of the law to Moses. With our Passover, the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, a saving event for us. And our Pentecost, the gift of the Holy Spirit. Both celebrate a saving action followed by the formation of God's people. The Jews by the law and Christians by the Holy Spirit, which enables us to remember and correctly interpret Christ's teachings. Advocate the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I told you. The Holy Spirit gives us courage to proclaim the good news of Christ and promotes unity and tolerance whenever he is present. When the disciples, most of whom were Galileans and who spoke Aramaic that others barely understood, began to preach, miraculously each listener heard the message in his own language. The Holy Spirit could have given the disciples the ability to speak the various languages of the crowds. However, our experience with visionaries like Bernadette of Lourdes, the children of Fatima, the youth of Medjugorje, etc., etc., is that the messages from the Virgin Mary or angels are transmitted telepathically. Those close by do not hear what is said to the visionaries. I believe that on Pentecost, the message of the gospel, although spoken in the native languages of the disciples, was transmitted telepathically to the crowds. Most of us are not able to communicate telepathically, but there is another language that everyone can understand. You know what that language is? It is called the language of love, kindness, charity, mercy, forgiveness, etc. The 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit cannot be understood by consulting a dictionary. Some words would appear similar. The gifts have particular meanings, just as each professional uses familiar words to have specific meaning. We call them jargon. In military terms, if you run into the top brass, it doesn't refer to metal objects. It refers to the generals and those in command. The military used to stand down. You don't take a step anywhere. It means do not engage the enemy. They also use collateral damage, which means they miss the bridge and hit somebody's house. Wisdom, the ability to love spiritual things more than material things. The essence of God is love. Therefore, participation in love, which includes charity, compassion, forgiveness, mercy, etc., is participation in the life of God. Spiritual things are not restricted to prayers and worship, but also include loving relationships. That is why the church teaches that people are always more important than things. Understanding, knowing your faith and the teachings of Christ, i.e., what is truth. Counsel, the ability to choose between right and wrong, good and evil. Fortitude, the courage to live according to our beliefs, to stand up for what is right. Knowledge is knowledge of God through assimilation of all the teachings of the church. Piety, a humble reverence for God that comes from our love and trust of Him. Fear of God, the ability to recognize the wonder, awe, and majesty of God. The Catechism of the Catholic Church has a more detailed description of these gifts. Maybe you should consult it when you get home. The gifts of the Holy Spirit are like all other gifts we may discover within ourselves. The ability to play a piano, paint, to sing, or to excel at a certain sport. These are talents that have to be developed. Many of us know someone who was extremely talented but did not develop his talent. because he was never given the opportunity, maybe lack of schooling, or refused to make the commitment necessary to succeed. We all have the above mentioned gifts, but we have to take the time and make the effort to develop them. Most people develop their talents because they can be handsomely rewarded by wealth, fame, and power, while others do so for the love of humanity. The gifts of the Holy Spirit benefit humanity because of the type of fruits that they will generate from within us. The traditional 12 fruits are charity, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, generosity, gentleness, faithfulness, modesty, self-control, and chastity. Who we are is how we act, and not who we think we are. As Jesus would say, you shall know a tree by the fruit it bears. A good checkup of our spiritual health would be to examine the list of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, and I'll repeat them again: charity, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, generosity, gentleness, faithfulness, modesty, self-control, and chastity, to determine which ones we are producing and which ones we are failing to produce. If many in our community can produce most of these fruits, we, the community of St. Bartholomew, shall enjoy the peace that comes from the Holy Spirit. Please pray the Holy Spirit for guidance